It was a gray afternoon, the kind of day that seems to predict rain that never comes. Jake, 17, walked slowly alongside his little sister, Emily, who was 8 years old. He had promised to take her to the park after school, even though he'd rather stay home playing video games. The city park was small and simple, but Emily loved the place. The swings, the rusty carousel, and the colorful slide always sparked her imagination. For Jake, it was just an ordinary park. When they arrived, Jake noticed the park was emptier than usual. Dry leaves danced across the ground in the wind, and the air felt colder than it should for that time of year. A few kids were playing in the distance while their mothers chatted distractedly on the benches. Emily didn't seem to mind the strange atmosphere. Her eyes lit up with excitement as she ran toward the swings. As he watched Emily, something caught Jake's attention. Near the park entrance stood a man. He was holding a dozen vibrantly colored balloons that seemed out of place against the gray sky. The man was dressed as a clown, colorful outfit, exaggerated makeup, and a pointed hat. Jake frowned. There weren't any parties or events that day, so why would someone be selling balloons there? The clown didn't move. He just stood there watching the park, a wide, frozen smile painted on his face. Jake tried to ignore him, but there was something unsettling about the man. The way he held the balloons, almost effortlessly, while the wind didn't seem to touch them. It was as if time around him had stopped. "Look, Jake, balloons!" Emily shouted, breaking his train of thought. Before he could respond, she ran toward the clown. "Emily, wait!" Jake yelled, following closely. He didn't know why, but a wave of anxiety hit him as she approached the stranger. As he got closer, Jake noticed the clown's smile was even more disturbing up close. His eyes, in stark contrast to the smile, were cold and empty, as if there was no life behind them. "Hello, would you like a balloon?" the clown asked in a slow, deep voice. Emily, enchanted by the bright colors, looked at Jake expectantly. "I don't think that's a good idea, Emily," Jake said, trying to pull her back. But the clown extended a red balloon toward her. "It's free," he said, never taking his eyes off Jake. There was something in the tone of his voice that sent a shiver down the teenager's spine. Jake hesitated. He didn't want to scare Emily, but every instinct in him screamed to leave. "All right, just one," he finally relented. When Jake took the balloon to hand it to Emily, he felt something strange. The string was rougher than it should have been, almost alive. For a moment, he thought he felt it tighten in his hand. "Thank you," the clown said, his smile seeming to stretch even wider. Jake tried to smile back, but couldn't. There was a tension in the air, as if something unseen was watching their every move. Emily held the balloon joyfully, while Jake cast a final wary glance at the clown. He was still standing there, but something in his eyes glimmered with malicious amusement. As Jake and Emily began to walk away, he looked back only to realize the clown was no longer there. "Where did he go?" he murmured to himself, but didn't want to alarm Emily. Maybe the clown had left while Jake was distracted. Still, something inside him told him it wasn't that simple. Jake and Emily continued walking through the park, but the red balloon seemed to draw more attention than it should. Emily was beaming, clutching the string as she ran toward the slide. Jake, on the other hand, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off about the gift. He glanced around, trying to spot the clown, but it was as if the man had vanished into thin air. The park was small and open. There was nowhere he could have hidden so quickly. While Emily climbed the slide, Jake decided to take another look around. The sky had grown darker, the trees swayed in the wind, and he noticed that the park was even emptier than before. Even the few kids who had been playing on the swings seemed to have left. Jake tried to brush off the thought, convincing himself he was just imagining things. It was just a clown, just a balloon. He didn't believe in scary stories. "Jake, look!" Emily shouted from the top of the slide, pointing to the sky. Jake looked up and saw the balloon floating just above her, tethered by the string in her hand. Strangely, it seemed brighter now, almost as if it were glowing from within. Jake shrugged and smiled to reassure her. "All right, Emily, but don't let go of that balloon. I'm not going back to get another one." She just laughed, sliding down with the carefree energy of a child. Then Jake heard it. A laugh. Not Emily's, and not any other child's in the park. It was a deep, raspy chuckle, coming from somewhere distant. He whipped his head around in all directions, trying to locate the source of the sound, but saw nothing. "Did anyone else hear that?" he muttered, but there was no one nearby to answer. A chill ran down his spine as the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, the unmistakable feeling of being watched creeping over him. When Emily came running back to him, Jake tried to act normal. "Let's go to the swings, Jake," she said, tugging at his hand. He nodded, but his eyes stayed alert, scanning for any sign of the clown. As they crossed the park, he saw him again, standing in the shadow of a tree. It was the same man, with the same fixed smile, but now there was something even stranger about him. The makeup looked smudged, as if it had melted slightly, and his eyes were locked onto Jake. "Hey, did you see him over there?" Jake asked Emily, pointing discreetly. But when he looked again, the clown was gone. "See who?" she asked, her innocent voice oblivious to her brother's discomfort. Jake shook his head, trying to convince himself he was just tired. Maybe it was all in his head. But the sinking feeling in his stomach told a different story. As Emily ran to the swings, Jake sat on a nearby bench, still holding the balloon string. He tried to pull it from Emily's hand to tie it to the swing's post, but the string wouldn't budge. "Emily, let go of the balloon for a second," he said, tugging harder. She frowned. "I already let go," she replied, waving her hands in the air to prove it. But the balloon stayed tethered, as if the string had a life of its own. Jake's eyes widened, but before he could say anything, the balloon seemed to release itself. It floated slowly upward, rising a few feet in the air before drifting back down to Emily's side. She laughed and tried to grab it, thinking it was part of a game. Jake, however, couldn't look away. The balloon seemed to move deliberately, as if it was choosing where to be. Suddenly, the same laugh echoed again, louder and closer this time. Jake jumped from the bench, spinning around in every direction, desperately searching for the source of the sound. That's when he saw it, at the far edge of the park near the rusty swings. The clown was there again, but now he wasn't alone. Behind him, several silhouettes appeared, faintly illuminated by the weak glow of the red balloon. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her close. "Time to go home," he said, trying to sound calm, but his voice trembled. Emily protested, but Jake wasn't about to argue. As they left the park, Jake looked back one last time. The clown was still there, unmoving, watching them with that terrible smile. Around him, the balloons floated as if they were alive, and Jake had the sinking realization that this was only the beginning. Jake and Emily hurried toward the park's exit, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced over his shoulder every few steps, expecting to see the clown or those strange silhouettes again. However, the path seemed empty. "Why are you in such a rush, Jake?" Emily asked, the red balloon still floating cheerfully beside her. He tried to play it off, but the unease in his voice was unmistakable. "It's just getting late, Emily. We need to get home." When they reached the park gates, Jake let out a sigh of relief. The park seemed distant now, as if they'd left a heavy weight behind. But as they turned the corner and began walking down the sidewalk toward home, Jake noticed something was wrong. Emily's balloon, which had been floating high and carefree, started to sink, hovering at shoulder height. It moved oddly, swaying back and forth as though being tugged by an invisible force. Jake tried to ignore it, but when he looked again, he saw the balloon string wrapped tightly around Emily's wrist. "Why did you tie it like that?" he asked, leaning down to untangle it. Emily frowned. "I didn't tie anything, Jake. I'm just holding it." He pulled at the string, trying to loosen it, but the more he tugged, the tighter it seemed to get. Hold still, let me get this off, he said, trying to stay calm. As he struggled with the knot, Jake heard the laugh again. This time, it wasn't distant or muffled. It was clear, almost as if it were right beside them. He dropped the string and whipped his head around, his heart racing. The street was empty. The wind blew softly, rustling dry leaves along the sidewalk, but there was no one there. Did you hear that? He asked, looking at Emily. She shook her head, distracted by the balloon, which had begun to float upward again. Jake's uneasiness grew with every step. The sensation of being followed was unbearable. He kept glancing over his shoulder but saw nothing except the shadows of trees cast by the dim streetlights. Jake, why are you so nervous? Emily finally asked, noticing his agitation. He took a deep breath, trying not to scare her. Just stay close to me, okay? Don't let go of my hand. Suddenly, the balloon yanked upward, nearly pulling Emily's arm with it. Hey, she yelped, clutching the string tightly. Jake turned immediately and saw the balloon thrashing, almost as if it were trying to escape. He reached for the string, but when his hand touched it, he felt a strange warmth, almost like it was alive. Let it go, Emily. Drop the balloon, he said, his voice firmer than he intended. I can't let go. Emily cried, tugging at the string desperately. Jake tried to help her, but the string seemed to tighten further, binding itself to her wrist as if it had a will of its own. The balloon began to glow faintly, pulsating with a deep red light that illuminated their faces. What is this? Jake whispered, fear evident in his voice. He pulled Emily close, trying to shield her, but the balloon seemed determined not to let them leave. Then he noticed something in the reflection of the balloon. It wasn't just the streetlight shining back at him. In the red glow, Jake saw the shadow of a face. It was the clown. His wide, unsettling grin was there, floating on the surface of the balloon, watching them. Jake blinked several times, thinking it was his imagination, but the face remained, unmoving, staring directly at him. Run, he yelled, grabbing Emily's hand. They sprinted down the sidewalk, but the balloon followed, floating fast behind them despite still being tethered to Emily's wrist. The laughter returned, louder this time, echoing through the empty street. Jake felt panic rising in his chest. No matter how fast they ran, the balloon was always right there. When they finally turned the corner onto their street, Jake glanced back one last time. The balloon had stopped abruptly in the middle of the road, hovering alone. The clown's face was still there, but something was different. He seemed to be laughing harder now, as if thoroughly enjoying their terror. Jake shoved Emily inside the house and slammed the door shut, locking it immediately. What was that, Jake? Emily asked, tears streaming down her face. He didn't answer. He just stared out the window, waiting to see the balloon again. But outside, the street was empty. For now. Jake closed all the curtains in the house while Emily sat on the couch, still clutching her wrist where the balloon string had hurt her. Her face was red from crying, and Jake could barely control his own nervousness as he tried to calm her down. It's okay now, Emily. We're home. Nothing can hurt us here. He said this more to himself than to her. The image of the clown reflected in the balloon still burned in his mind, and he couldn't make sense of what had just happened. Emily sniffled, holding his hand. Jake, I'm scared. The balloon, it was alive. It was real, right? You saw it? He hesitated, unsure how to respond. I don't know what that was. Maybe we just imagined things. But even he didn't believe that. The clown's face, the laugh, the way the balloon seemed to chase them, it all felt too real to be imagination. As Jake tried to calm her down, he heard a noise from outside. It was faint at first, almost a whisper, but gradually it grew louder. It was the laugh again. That raspy, distorted laugh that seemed to mock them. He froze, staring at the door. Emily clung to him, trembling. Jake, what is that? He shook his head, trying to think. It must be someone outside. I'll be right back. Stay here. He walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside. What he saw made his heart stop for a second. The balloon was there, floating right in the middle of the sidewalk, exactly where they had left it. But now it wasn't alone. The clown was standing next to it. He wasn't moving, just staring directly at Jake's window, that wide, unsettling grin on his face. Jake quickly backed away, shutting the curtain again. He tried not to panic, but his hands were shaking uncontrollably. He grabbed his phone and dialed the police number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, before the line was finally picked up. "Emergency, what's the problem?" Jake tried to stay calm. "There's a strange man standing in front of my house. He's dressed as a clown and has a balloon." He hoped to hear a reassuring response, but instead, the line dropped. "Damn it!" Jake exclaimed, hanging up and trying again. But this time, the phone didn't even ring. A static noise filled the line, and for a moment, Jake thought he heard the laugh coming through the receiver. He threw the phone on the couch, feeling panic rise. Emily looked at him with wide eyes, as if she could sense something was terribly wrong. "Jake, did he leave?" she whispered. Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like thunder, cutting through the tense silence. Jake stared at the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he shouldn't open it, but something about the insistent ringing pulled him toward it. "Jake, don't open it," Emily pleaded, gripping his arm. He nodded but felt the need to see who was there. Slowly, he walked toward the door and peeked through the peephole. Outside, the porch was empty. There was no one there, not even the balloon or the clown. Jake stepped back, a chill running down his spine. Then, the sound changed. The doorbell stopped ringing, but something began tapping on the door, as if long, firm fingers were scraping against the wood. Jake covered his mouth to stop himself from screaming and slowly backed away. "Emily, go upstairs and lock the door." "Now!" Emily hesitated but ran up the stairs, leaving Jake alone. He grabbed a baseball bat from the corner of the room and approached the door again. The scraping noise stopped, but a new sound took its place, the laugh. This time, it seemed to come from all sides, echoing through the walls of the house. Jake felt a pressure on his chest, as if the air was getting heavier. Then, he heard the most terrifying sound of all. A soft crack came from the window behind him. Jake turned quickly and saw the balloon. It was now inside the house, floating in the corner of the room. And reflected in its shiny surface was the clown's face, still smiling. But this time, his eyes were fixed directly on Jake, filled with malice. Jake felt his legs go weak as he saw the balloon floating in the room. He blinked, hoping it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but the balloon remained there, hovering with a sinister glow. The clown's face, reflected in the red surface, seemed to laugh at his helplessness. Jake gripped the baseball bat tighter, but fear paralyzed him. How had it gotten into the house? All the doors and windows were locked. "Jake, what's going on?" Emily's voice echoed from upstairs. He didn't want to scare her more than she already was, but he knew he had to get his sister out of there. Without taking his eyes off the balloon, Jake replied, "Emily, stay in the room. Don't leave. Do you hear me?" The silence that followed made him even more nervous, but he didn't have time to go upstairs and make sure she was safe. With cautious steps, Jake began to retreat, keeping the balloon in his line of sight. It seemed motionless, but he knew something wasn't right. With every step he took, the air in the room seemed to grow heavier, as if an invisible force was pressing against him. The laugh, which had once come from outside, now seemed to echo inside his mind, low and disturbing, like a constant buzzing. Suddenly, the balloon moved. Slowly, it began to float toward him. Jake felt a knot form in his throat and instinctively raised the baseball bat. "Stay away," he shouted, as if his words could stop it. The balloon paused for a moment, as if assessing the situation, before continuing to move, faster now. Jake swung the bat with all his strength, but just before he could hit it, the balloon deftly veered out of the way, floating to the corner of the room. Jake froze. This was impossible. A balloon shouldn't move like that, shouldn't be able to dodge. He swallowed hard, panic rising with every passing second. It was then that he noticed something even more terrifying. The clown's reflection in the balloon was moving. While the balloon remained still in the air, the figure reflected in it tilted its head to the side and gestured with its hands, as if mocking Jake. "You're not real," Jake whispered, trying to convince himself. But the clown in the reflection smiled even wider, as if it had heard his words. Then, with a sudden sharp sound, the balloon popped. Jake jumped back, covering his face with his arms. When he opened his eyes again, the room was filled with a strange smell, something like burnt rubber mixed with something rotten. Where the balloon had been, there was only a piece of string lying on the floor. Before he could process what was happening, the doorbell rang again. It wasn't the usual quick, normal sound from before. This was a continuous, desperate ringing, as if someone were hammering the button non-stop. Jake ran to the door and looked through the peephole. Outside, the clown was standing there again, even closer this time. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, dozens of balloons floated, forming a kind of living wall that filled the street. Jake took a step back, his heart racing so fast he thought he might pass out. He heard footsteps upstairs and realized that Emily had left her room. "Jake, what's happening?" "I'm scared." Her voice trembled, and he knew he couldn't leave her alone. "Stay there, Emily." "I'll be right there," he shouted, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Suddenly, a loud bang on the window made Jake turn. One of the balloons was there, pressed up against the glass. The clown's face was back, smiling like before. Jake recoiled, but the balloons kept appearing, one by one, covering all the windows of the house. It was as if the house was being surrounded by an invisible force, each balloon pulsing with that eerie red light. Jake realized there was no way out. He needed to protect Emily at all costs. With the baseball bat still in hand, he ran up the stairs, finding his sister in the hallway. "We need to get out of here," he said, grabbing her hand. Emily started crying. "But where, Jake?" "They're outside." He didn't have an answer. He only knew he had to do something before it was too late. Jake and Emily ran down the dark hallway, their footsteps echoing off the silent walls of the house. Fear spread through the air like a disease, and each breath Jake took felt too heavy. He gripped Emily's hand tightly, feeling the tension in his fingers. "Stay with me, Emily. Don't let go of my hand, no matter what," he whispered, trying to offer her a sense of security he didn't have himself. She just nodded, her pale face illuminated by the faint light spilling through the windows, now covered by a barrier of balloons. They reached Emily's room, the place where she felt safest, but as they entered, a sense of claustrophobia immediately enveloped them. The space seemed smaller, as if the walls were closing in around them. Jake looked out the window, hoping the side of the balloons was restricted to the lower floor. But that's not what he found. Outside, the street was overtaken. They were surrounded. Red balloons floated in all directions, as if they were waiting. The clown's reflection was on every surface, smiling, watching. "We can't get out that way," Jake said, his words coming out almost as a sigh. The house felt like a prison, and the terror of being cornered was overwhelming. Emily huddled in the corner of the room, trembling. "I don't want to die, Jake. I'm scared. He's going to get us." Her words cut through the air, and for a moment, Jake didn't know what to say. How could he reassure her when he didn't have any answers? Trying to stay calm, Jake went to the window and with a swift motion, tore the curtain down. There was no sign of any patrol or help coming down the street. Everything was too quiet. The clown was still there, standing, with the balloons floating around him, as if he were a puppet controlling all that darkness. A low, almost inaudible laugh filled the air. It was as if the clown was enjoying himself, watching their struggle for survival. "I don't understand. Why is he doing this to us?" Jake murmured, not really expecting an answer. He looked at Emily, whose eyes were glazed over, fixed on some distant point. The fear was clear on her face, but there was something else too, a sense of acceptance, as if she already knew there was no escape. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Suddenly, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house again. This time, it was a more frantic sound, an irregular thumping that seemed to signal the end. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, wishing it was just a nightmare, but when he opened them again, the reality was even darker. "We're not opening the door. No matter what happens, Emily," he said, but his voice trembled. He wasn't sure if he believed his own words. The knocks on the door began to intensify, reverberating through the house with growing force. The clown appeared in the reflection of the window again, but now something was different. His eyes seemed to glow with an intense red, and his smile, once terrifying, now appeared grotesque, distorted by malice. It was as if he was getting closer, inflating, growing bigger as the tension built. Jake swallowed hard, feeling a pressure on his chest. The clown was inside his mind, manipulating everything around him. Jake turned quickly to Emily, who was now lying on the floor, her eyes glazed, as if in a trance. "Emily! Emily, look at me," he shouted, shaking her shoulders. But she didn't respond. The fear of losing his sister was like a sharp blade. He shook her again, desperately. "No, no, no, Emily! Wake up!" That's when he saw it, in the reflection of the window, the clown's hand tapping on the glass with supernatural force. Jake froze, feeling the air around him thicken. The clown was closer than ever. Suddenly, Emily stood up, but her gaze was empty, distant. She walked slowly toward the window, like a puppet, a strange smile on her face. Jake tried to stop her, but his arms could no longer move quickly enough. The fear was making him weak. "Emily, no! It's not you," he shouted, trying to pull her back. But she moved away from him, her steps now slow and calculated. What Jake saw next was something he could never have imagined. When Emily reached the window and touched the glass, the reflection of the clown distorted into her image. It was as if his face was merging with hers. Her smile widened, but now it was the clown's smile. Jake screamed, but his voice was muffled by a wave of terror so dense he could barely breathe. The clown now controlled his sister, and she was lost forever. The moment Emily looked at him, the balloons began to pop, one by one, outside the house, as if marking the end. The clown's laughter filled the entire house, and before Jake could react, he felt a pressure on his head, as if something were pulling him into the darkness. The last sound he heard was Emily's scream, mixed with the laughter, as he fell into the abyss of fear that would never let him go. The clown from the playground. It was a hot, muggy summer afternoon in a small town in the United States, where the quiet routine seemed to never change. The kind of town where everyone knows each other and the days pass slowly, with no hurry to end. The playground, located in the town center, was the favorite place for the local children, with its tall swings, shiny slides, and the large grassy field where they could run freely until dusk. It was where childhood friends gathered, sharing laughter and play under the gentle warmth of the sun. A group of children was at the park that late afternoon, as usual. There was Sarah, the bravest of the group, with her brown hair tied in a messy ponytail and a red t-shirt with wild animal prints. Tom, her best friend, who always wore an easy smile and was ready for any adventure, and Lucy, the shyest of the trio, always observant, with curious but cautious eyes. They were having fun on one of the large seesaws, pushing each other and daring one another to see who could swing the highest. The sky was clear, with no clouds in sight, and the atmosphere of the park was light and carefree. The children's laughter echoed, mixed with the soft sound of the wind rustling through the leaves of the trees around them. It was, in essence, the perfect summer afternoon scene until a strange figure appeared. At first, no one paid much attention when the man entered the park. He appeared to be a clown, but something about him was off. He wore an exaggeratedly voluminous blonde wig, a face painted heavily and disproportionately, with a smile far too wide to be natural. His red and colorful outfit was worn and slightly dirty, as if it had been used too many times. But it wasn't his appearance that was odd, it was the way he moved. While most of the adults in the park were with their children or sitting on benches chatting, the clown walked back and forth, with slow steps, as if he were watching more than participating in the fun. Lucy was the first to notice, her gaze fixed on him while the other two continued playing. She didn't know exactly what was wrong, but she felt an inexplicable chill crawl up her spine. He wasn't the friendly, fun-loving clown she was used to seeing at birthday parties. This one seemed different. The man's smile wasn't welcoming but disturbing, as if he was hiding something behind the exaggerated makeup. Lucy glanced at Sarah and Tom, but they were so caught up in the game that they hadn't noticed the clown's presence. "Who is this guy?" Lucy murmured to herself, trying to discreetly move closer to the seesaw where Sarah and Tom were. Sarah, always up for any challenge, looked at the man and shrugged. "Probably a street performer, I don't know. Maybe he's just waiting for an audience." But even Sarah, with her bold demeanor, seemed uncomfortable. Something in the clown's gaze made her hesitate. The clown then took a step toward the group, and it was at that moment that something strange happened. The children around them began to stop playing, one by one, as if something in the air had changed. A heavy silence settled over the park, and for a brief moment, everyone seemed to forget what they were doing. The laughter stopped, and the sound of the wind in the trees seemed more distant. The clown stopped at a safe distance from the others, but continued watching, his eyes fixed on Sarah and his smile widening. It was a cold, empty look, but somehow possessive, as if he were waiting for the right moment to approach. No words were spoken, but the clown's behavior conveyed a clear message. He wasn't there by chance. The feeling that something was about to happen, something wrong, took over the group. Lucy, more sensitive to this kind of tension, grabbed Sarah's arm. "I don't like this. Let's go." Sarah looked at the clown and for a moment hesitated. She couldn't explain it, but the feeling of discomfort grew, like a pressure on her chest. And before she could respond, the clown began walking toward them. What had seemed like an ordinary afternoon in the park quickly turned into a nerve-wracking game, and the children felt a strange presence, something they had never experienced before. A shadow in the air, a premonition that something was about to change, and not for the better. The sun was slowly setting on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. The shadows in the park began to lengthen, and with them, a sense of unease hung in the air. The clown, once a distant figure, was now much closer, pacing back and forth with slow, awkward steps. He didn't talk to anyone, nor did he approach the children to perform tricks or interact. In fact, it seemed like he was trying to hide in plain sight, as though he had something to conceal. But his eyes, concealed beneath the colorful makeup, were watching intently, always focused on the groups of children playing. Sarah, Tom, and Lucy, although still maintaining a facade of bravery, couldn't help but feel the discomfort grow within them. The games had become quieter, and the laughter forced. Sarah, who had initially paid little attention, now started to feel bothered by the man's presence. She looked at him several times, and every time her eyes met the clown's, she felt a chill run down her spine. His smile never seemed to fade. It was an empty smile, stretched too wide, that didn't match the lighthearted atmosphere of a playground. He was there, but he didn't seem to care about the children or what was going on around him. Lucy was the first to break the silence, speaking softly. "He's staring at us, isn't he?" Sarah looked at Tom, who didn't seem to notice anything unusual. "He's just a clown, Lou." "Maybe he's waiting for some kind of performance," Sarah said, trying to reassure herself, but her voice betrayed a slight tremor. The clown continued his walk through the park with a disturbing calmness. Sometimes, he would stop near the trees, observing the children from a distance. He didn't make any sudden movements, nor did he seek to interact in a playful way, like any other clown would. There was a coldness to his presence that felt different from anything the children had ever experienced. He was there, but he wasn't part of the scene. When the clown approached the seesaw where Sarah, Tom, and Lucy were playing, things started to get even stranger. He stopped just a few meters away, staring at them with a fixed and intense gaze. Sarah tried to ignore him, but the discomfort was too great to be ignored. Their eyes met for a second, and the clown's smile widened. Something in his expression made Sarah hold her breath. It wasn't just strange, it was threatening. Tom, distracted with the game, finally realized what was going on. He's been staring at us the whole time. What does he want? He asked, uneasy. Lucy, more cautious, could no longer tear her gaze away. There was something wrong with that man. She began looking around, trying to find a logical explanation for what she was feeling. The other children in the park, however, continued playing without noticing anything unusual. The world seemed to keep moving on, but the trio felt that something was about to happen. The clown took a step toward them, and before they could react, he began speaking in a deep but soft voice that spread through the air. Who wants to see the real magic? The group froze. His voice wasn't upbeat like a typical clown's. It was muffled, with a dark tone, as if carrying a weight no one else could hear. Others around them, including some children playing nearby, began to laugh and gather closer to the clown as if he were some sort of attraction. But to Sarah, Tom, and Lucy, it felt wrong. The clown was manipulating the environment around them as if he had control over everyone's attention. That's when Lucy, with her heart racing, noticed something even more disturbing. She looked at the ground, where the dust was rising, as if something had been dragged there. Looking closer, she saw small plastic flowers, the kind used to decorate balloons, scattered around the clown's feet. It was a bizarre sight. There were no balloons nearby, only plastic flowers, all arranged symmetrically around him. The sight was unbearable. Lucy swallowed hard and, with a growing sense of panic, whispered to her friends, He left those flowers there, didn't he? He's leading clues. Sarah looked at the flowers and frowned, trying to understand, but her mind was already so filled with doubts that she couldn't think clearly. Tom, in turn, was so unsettled by the clown's behavior that he didn't know what to do. He looked around, hoping some adult would take the lead, but to his surprise, the adults were so absorbed in their conversations or distracted by their own affairs that no one seemed to notice the clown's abnormal behavior. They were alone. Then, suddenly, the clown turned and began walking slowly away, his steps dragging, unhurried. He didn't say anything more, but left behind a sense of apprehension and mystery that seemed to spread through the park. The three friends looked at each other, all thinking the same thing: something was very wrong here. While the other children continued to play, oblivious to what was behind that strange figure, the trio knew, somehow, that the peaceful afternoon at the park had transformed into something dark. Something, or someone, was watching. Night was slowly falling, casting a soft, yellowish light over the park, but the atmosphere, once full of fun, had become dense and tense. The trio of friends, Sarah, Tom, and Lucy, were restless, trying to mask the fear growing inside them. The clown had left, but his presence still lingered in the air, like a shadow, something that didn't dissipate with the falling night. The laughter of the children around began to fade, and the park seemed emptier than ever. Then it happened. Something they could never have imagined. A scream. A scream of panic that cut through the air, coming from one of the farthest playgrounds, near the large, rusty carousel. The sound was so sudden and sharp that everyone in the park turned in the direction of the noise. The trio, already uneasy, ran toward the scream, but what they found there left them paralyzed. As they reached the carousel, Sarah was the first to notice something was wrong. "Where's Joey?" she asked, looking around. Joey was one of the younger boys in the group, with blonde hair and an easy laugh. He was only 8 years old and had been playing there just before the scream. But now, there was no sign of him. The carousel stood still, the children around appeared confused, and no one knew what had happened. Tom started calling Joey's name, but the silence that answered was absolute. The scream they had heard seemed to echo in his mind, but there was no one around. No children, no adults. Just a sense of emptiness, as if the park had swallowed Joey. Lucy looked around, feeling a growing knot in her throat. She knew something was wrong. He was here, she said, her voice trembling. "I saw him just now, playing with the others. He can't have just disappeared." But what the three knew deep down was that he was gone. And there was no explanation for it. At that moment, one of the adults, a woman sitting on a nearby bench, ran over to them. She was pale, her eyes wide. I saw the clown near the carousel. He was looking at Joey, and then, Then the boy disappeared. The trio froze. The clown. It was impossible to ignore the connection between the man's strange presence and Joey's disappearance. Sarah's eyes widened, and she took a step back. The clown, he did this, didn't he? She murmured, fear taking hold of her. The police were called immediately. The park was cordoned off, and the officers arrived quickly, beginning an intense search of the area. But what they found was baffling. There were no traces of Joey. No footprints on the grass, no evidence that he had been forcibly taken. The carousel was empty, the playgrounds around it deserted. The children who were there, including Sarah, Tom, and Lucy, reported seeing the clown near the disappearance site, but no one could confirm his presence in a concrete way. The officers scoured the park for hours, checking every corner, every tree, but nothing indicated that Joey had been taken. It was as if he had simply evaporated, disappeared without a trace. The park's security cameras didn't capture anything unusual, except a slight distortion in the footage that coincided with the clown passing by the carousel. No concrete clues, no explanation. Just an immense emptiness that seemed to spread throughout the park. Panic began to spread quickly. The children were sent home, and the police asked parents to keep their children indoors until the situation was resolved. But inside Sarah, Tom, and Lucy, the doubt and fear grew more and more. How could something so inexplicable happen? How could someone disappear in broad daylight, in a place full of people, without leaving a single sign of where they went? As the hours passed, the news of the disappearance spread through the town, and rumors began to surface. Some said the clown had something to do with Joey's disappearance. Others, more skeptical, tried to find rational explanations, but no one could deny that the disappearance itself was an anomaly. Something was terribly wrong, and for Sarah, Tom, and Lucy, everything seemed to point to the clown somehow being involved. But how could they prove that? The hours passed without answers, and the feeling of anguish and fear only grew. The clown seemed to vanish just as Joey had, but something told them this wasn't the end of the story. The park, once a place of joy and fun, had now become a symbol of mystery and terror. The disappearance of a child without a trace couldn't be easily explained, and all eyes were now on the clown. But who, or what, was he really? And why Joey? For days had passed since Joey's disappearance, but the sense of panic and unease still hung over the small town. The police had investigated the case with all their might, but without any leads, hope was beginning to fade. People were more cautious, the streets quieter, and the tension was palpable. But what no one knew was that the clown's presence was far from forgotten. That night, the wind blew fiercely, carrying with it a sense that something was about to happen. The lights of the houses on the street where Joey lived began to flicker out, one by one, as if the entire town were preparing for something dark. It was then that a resident, from a house just a few meters from where the tragedy had unfolded, heard a muffled laugh echoing down the silent street. But it wasn't a regular laugh. It was strange, sharp, and prolonged, as if being whispered, yet at the same time, so clear it seemed to cut through the walls. The sound seemed to come from far away, yet at the same time, it was so close. Some neighbors looked at each other suspiciously, but no one had the courage to investigate. The night was cold, and the fear already present in the town kept everyone locked inside their homes, feeling insecure. But something was wrong. And once again, all eyes were on the clown. It was that same night that he appeared again. Not in a distant place, but right near Joey's house, walking through the deserted streets. He was alone once more, with his excessively wide smile and his empty eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. At first, his figure was just a shadow dancing in the dim streetlights, but soon he became visible to those few still alert to the night. The clown's presence, now closer to the house of the missing boy, did not go unnoticed. People who were still awake began to notice the distorted figure moving through the streets, briefly stopping in front of houses, as if searching for something or someone. Whispers quickly spread, "The clown is back." But what did he want? Why was he here, so close to the heart of the mystery that had taken over the town? The following morning, reports began to surface. Neighbors spoke of strange noises the previous night, like cracking and muffled laughs, as if someone was having fun in a very sinister way. But the sounds didn't stop there. In the nights that followed, more events began to occur. The sound of balloons popping, echoing through the deserted streets, became a constant presence. At first, people thought it was just children playing, but the frequency and tone of the pops didn't match what would be normal for a playground. Then, on the third night, something happened. One of the houses on Joey's street was awakened by a series of loud laughs and pops. But these weren't the laughs of children. There was no joy in them, only a cold and distorted feeling, as if the sound itself was warped by the darkness. The family inside the house, frightened, ran outside to see what was happening. But when they reached the door, there was no one there. Only the sound of balloons popping, as if floating in the air, invisible but present. The wind carried the plastic fragments away, but no one knew where they were coming from. The house was intact, but the fear, now more real than ever, was palpable. As the days passed, the clown's behavior became increasingly disturbing. He began appearing at night, always near Joey's house, watching the streets and disappearing into the shadows before anyone had the chance to approach. Some residents said they saw his silhouette, and on other occasions, just the sound of his sinister laughter would make them look out the window, but whenever they did, he was already gone. Families began reporting other strange events. Some saw faint lights glowing in their windows at night, as if someone were lighting lanterns in the garden, but when they went outside to check, there was nothing there. A growing murmur about the clown spread through the town. He was no longer just scaring the children, he was terrifying everyone. The fear of being watched, of being followed, took hold of everyone, and the park, where it all began, now seemed like a place of terror at night. Some even claimed to hear the clown's laughter coming from there, followed by the sound of balloons popping, as if he were enjoying the growing fear of the people. It was in this atmosphere of widespread panic that the families began to unite. Some tried to protect themselves, locking doors and windows, while others began questioning what the clown wanted. But deep down, everyone knew something far worse was coming. The clown was not there by accident. He had returned with a purpose, and no one knew what he would do next. The weeks had dragged on in an escalating spiral of fear and uncertainty. Families locked themselves inside their homes, and the presence of the clown had become a constant shadow hanging over the town. For Sarah, Tom, and Lucy, however, there was something more driving them. They could no longer live with the doubt. The unanswered questions, the screams at night, the distorted laughter, all of it consumed them. They needed to know what was behind that sinister figure, what the clown wanted, and, most importantly, why he was causing so much suffering. On the night they decided to confront the clown, the sky was cloudy, and the darkness seemed thicker than ever. The town was silent, as if the earth itself knew something big was about to happen. The trio, armed only with courage and determination, gathered at the park where it all began. The same park that was now immersed in mystery and terror. They knew the clown would appear, as he always did, and they were ready to follow him. "We'll find the truth," Sarah said, her voice firm, but with a shadow of fear in her eyes. "It's time to confront him." With each step they took, the sounds of the park seemed to grow louder, the rustling of the leaves, the sound of a branch breaking in the distance, the sound of their own heavy breathing. They reached the carousel, which was now covered in a layer of dust and debris. The feeling of abandonment at the site was palpable. The dim lights illuminated the rusty, broken rides, creating a grim scene. Then, suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance. The clown. He was there, standing in the same position he had always been seen, his expression unchanged, as if he knew exactly where the trio was. He didn't move, just watched them with his empty, piercing gaze. But this time, something was different. There was no longer the twisted smile that had troubled them. In its place, a cold, calculating expression overtook his face. "You shouldn't be here," the clown said, his voice muffled by the darkness. He didn't sound threatening, but there was something in his words that made it clear he wasn't used to being challenged. "This is not your place." But Sarah, Tom, and Lucy weren't intimidated. They stepped forward, keeping their eyes locked on him. "You took Joey," Lucy said, her voice trembling, but full of determination. "Where is he? What did you do with him?" The clown let out a low laugh that reverberated through the air and slowly began to move, as if he were reflecting on his response. Joey. Joey is where all the others who came before him are, he said with a smile that made Sarah's hair stand on end. He's just another piece in my game. Without another word, the clown took a step back, as if inviting them to follow him. Come. I'll show you the truth. The tension mounted as the trio followed him. They walked through the park toward a more secluded area, away from the view of the town and the houses. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the silent night, and as they approached a small, abandoned building, the air seemed denser, heavier. There was something wrong with the place, as if it had been forgotten by everyone, but not by the clown. When they finally arrived, the sight that awaited them was terrifying. In the center of the room, a series of old photos were hanging on the walls, images of children of various ages. But the most disturbing thing was the fact that, in all of them, the children were with the clown, some smiling, others looking apprehensive. But these weren't photos of parties or fun. They seemed captures, as if the children had been forced to pose. This is what I do, the clown said, his eyes now burning with an unsettling intensity. I give laughter. I give fun. But there's a price. For every laugh, a soul must be taken. He looked directly at the three of them, as if waiting for a reaction. Do you want to know the truth? I am what remains of those who get lost. I am the fun that never ends. The clown who comes to take the children no one else sees. Because when they disappear, no one cares. But I continue. Always. The clown began to laugh in a strange way, a laugh without joy, empty, as if his soul were trapped in that endless cycle. He moved closer to Sarah, Tom, and Lucy, his eyes fixed on theirs, now devoid of any trace of humanity. I take those who are alone, those no one else sees, those who are afraid. I am the shadow of lost childhood. And now you know what happens to those who come to me. With a sudden movement, he turned, disappearing into the shadows, as if he had never been there. The trio stood still, staring at the photos on the walls, absorbing the clown's words. They had finally discovered the truth. The clown wasn't just a man, but an entity, a being that fed on fear and loneliness. He was the reflection of everything the town preferred to ignore. And now, the trio knew the true terror was just beginning. After the revelation of his macabre secret, the night seemed to stretch on endlessly. Sarah, Tom, and Lucy were paralyzed, immersed in a heavy silence as the clown's words echoed in their minds. The truth they had discovered was more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The clown was not just a strange figure who scared them, but something much larger, a dark entity that fed on the fear of children, leading them to an unknown fate. The three friends remained in the small abandoned space for some time, reflecting on everything they had learned. The photos on the walls, the children who smiled or remained silent in front of the lenses, all of them were victims of something much deeper. The clown was not just a person, but a forgotten legend, a curse that perpetuated itself through the years. He didn't feed on food or money, he fed on lost souls, on the children who disappeared without a trace. When they finally left the place, burdened by what they had witnessed, the trio knew that something had to be done. They couldn't let the clown continue with his macabre mission. But the truth was, despite their courage, they didn't know how they could stop something so powerful. The clown was not like any common enemy, he was a shadow, a presence that transcended human understanding. The following days were difficult for the town. Joey's disappearance and the revelation of what was happening in the park shook the community irreversibly. Many families decided to leave the town, fearing what the clown might do next. The children who once played in the streets now hid inside their homes, and the adults began to question how they had ignored the signs of something so terrible for so long. The police, now aware of the true nature of the clown, tried to investigate further, but the truth was that no one knew how to hunt such an insidious entity. There were no concrete traces, no leads to follow. The clown was an intangible presence, something that could not be confronted in the traditional way. And so, the days passed, and the town tried to move on, but the feeling of being watched never fully disappeared. Sarah, Tom, and Lucy, as much as they wanted to, couldn't simply forget what they had discovered. The experience had changed them forever. Every time the wind blew at night, every time a distant laugh cut through the silence, they remembered what the clown was and how he watched them. The shadow of the clown never truly left them, and the memory of the park, with its broken rides and distorted laughter, was forever etched in their minds. Over time, people began to resume their lives, but the park was never the same. The rusted, abandoned structures became a symbol of everything the town preferred to forget. Some say the clown is still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to appear again. Others, more skeptical, believe he was just a product of collective fear and childhood imagination. But those who were there, who lived the experience up close, knew that the truth was much darker. However, despite everything that had happened, an unsettling feeling remained. When winter arrived and the first frost took over the town, people began to notice something strange. In the center of the park, in a forgotten corner, a new balloon appeared. No one knew where it had come from, but it was there, floating alone in the cold morning wind. And as the balloon swayed, a low, guttural laugh, almost imperceptible, seemed to come from somewhere distant, a reminder of what was still to come. The clown was never fully defeated. He may have disappeared for now, but the truth was that he always came back, always lurking, like the shadow that never fully dissipates. What began as a childhood game, an unsettling presence in the park, had turned out to be something much deeper and more sinister. And so, while the town tried to forget, while the adults pretended it was all just an urban legend, the clown's eyes watched in silence, waiting for the right moment to appear again, like a shadow that never completely fades away. The clown's story may not have ended. It was simply waiting for the next chapter.